As the clock strikes 1 a.m., Titanic's fate hangs in the balance. In the second hour of the sinking, a sense of dread and despair permeates the air, as passengers and crew alike grapple with the grim reality of their situation. On board, the ship's crew work tirelessly to maintain order and facilitate the evacuation, but their efforts are hampered by the overwhelming magnitude of the disaster. As the minutes tick by, the Titanic's hull groans and creaks under the strain, her structural integrity compromised by the relentless pressure of the surrounding water. Amidst the chaos and despair, the acts of heroism and selflessness emerge, as individuals strive to comfort and support one another in the face of unimaginable tragedy. And then, in the final moments of the second hour, the Titanic's fate is sealed as her hull finally gives way, breaking apart under the immense strain. In the final moments of the Titanic's sinking, chaos reigns as the crew races against time to save as many lives as possible. It is now 2 a.m., April 15, 1912, 112 years ago today. Titanic now has 20 minutes left to live. The final moments of the Titanic is nigh, as there's still 1,500 souls that's actually still on board the Titanic. The only lifeboat to be lowered at this time is Collapsible D, and it was the last lifeboat to be lowered with the use of traditional davits. Altogether, 671 passengers and crew have been evacuated off the ship, but 2 lifeboats remain on board, Collapsibles A and B. At first, the loading of this lifeboat is very chaotic, as Lightoller noticed a group of men hiding in the lifeboat, to which he pulled out his empty revolver and tells them, "Get out, you damn cowards! I'd like to see every one of you overboard." As Collapsible D is lowered into the water, 2 men actually did climb into this lifeboat. Their names were Hugh Warner and Morris Stephenson. Now, what they actually did not know, that up above them was actually Charles Lightoller, who actually saw these 2 men get into the boat, and he almost yelled at them to get out of the lifeboat, but then again he had to realize this is the last minutes of Titanic's life, so Lightoller let them live, but he was heavily against it. And there were also 2 more notable figures I actually did cover in a previous video. It's also worth mentioning as well are the Titanic orphans of Edmund and Michelle Navitro Jr., who were actually kidnapped by their father during an Easter weekend visit. So I will include a link to that video as a card or down in the description box below. Now currently, all the lifeboats are gone except for these 2 collapsible lifeboats up here. And the only way to get them down is basically from the officers' quarters. So basically we have Collapsible A here, Collapsible B here. The only way to get them down is remove the covers and use these oars to make a makeshift ramp to slide the lifeboats off the deck and get them hooked and lowered away. But the biggest problem is that there is not enough time, as the water is about to envelop the bridge. In the wireless room, faint messages were heard as Jack Phillips was still transmitting as Titanic is dramatically losing power. Harold Bride was busy in the office gathering their stuff so they could get up onto the boat deck and get off the ship together. As Bride was currently distracted and Jack Phillips was completely oblivious to his surroundings, a stoker came in to undo Phillips' life jacket, and as Bride came back into the wireless room, he noticed this and started getting the stoker off of him. The fight between the stoker and Harold Bride is enough to snap Jack Phillips out of the trance and use a heavy blunt object to subdue the threat. And once the stoker is neutralized, the wireless room is now abandoned. Both Jack Phillips and Harold Bride went their separate ways, as Bride went to help at Collapsible B, and it was around this time that Captain Edward J. Smith ordered an abandoned ship, and the band played their final hymn, "Nearer My God to Thee." Now, when people ask about what was the final song that was actually played on the Titanic, it is one of the popular questions surrounding the final moments of the sinking. To me, I believe it's "Nearer My God to Thee," but it took until one specific author, one of a popular book in 1957 called A Night to Remember by Walter Lord, said that it was actually Autumn that was actually played. Now, you can actually take that one with a grain of salt though, but to me, it's going to be Near My God Thee, but I always kind of believe it's actually both of them anyway, both Autumn and Near My God Thee. So basically, Autumn was basically the prelude song before Near My God Thee was basically the ultimate finale song. Before the sinking of the Titanic, and prior before the main voyage, Wallace Hartley, who's the bandmaster, who himself is a Methodist as well, when he was asked by a friend about what final song he would play, he would actually quote this
If I were ever on a sinking ship, I don't think I could do better than play "Oh God, our help in ages past" or "Near my God to Thee."
Collapsibles A and B were pushed off the top of the officers' quarters. Collapsible A would land right side up, and B would land upside down, hitting Harold Bride, to which he stayed underneath until the water floated up on Collapsible B, and Harold Bride was able to float out from underneath. And Harold Bride just can't get a break, can he? As passengers started to rush Collapsible A, gunshots were heard within the vicinity. The intended targets to this very day are still unknown, and whoever was the officer that was suspected was never named as the culprit. It would be possible that it was either Chief Officer Henry Wild or Chief Purser Hugh McElroy. At 2:10 a.m., Thomas Andrews went to Captain Smith for the very last time, and Thomas said to him, "There's no point staying, she is going." This was overheard by Cecil Fitzpatrick, who fainted towards a wall. And at 2:15 a.m., Captain Smith tells the crew, "Do your best for the women and children and look out for yourselves." Along the way, he bumped into trimmer James McGann, to which they got a hold of scared and frightened children, and they both leapt into the sea. Captain Smith would not survive, but James McGann would. At the time of this video, you may notice that I didn't actually state that Andrews actually did jump in water with Captain Smith. Basically, a historian friend of mine actually told me there's a possibility that Thomas Andrews did not actually leap into the sea as we previously known in the past. There's a possible chance that Andrews might got pulled down by the suction of what was about to come next. So basically, the popular belief of Andrews or Captain Smith being either in the first class smoking room or inside the wheelhouse, respectively, waiting for the inevitable end, is based off of the 1997 film.
Now, Titanic actually took a plunge and unexpectedly evened itself out. And the cause of this was basically the water being shifted back to starboard. Now, when ships sink, they actually do tend to capsize, like in Britannic's case, like what we saw in the previous video. But in this case whatsoever, the Titanic righted itself on an even keel. So anything unsecured at this time frame actually starts moving forward, and anything from stack plates and wooden furniture actually starts shifted forward to the bow. Another event actually did happen. It was basically Charles Lightoller, who was basically still around in this area, who actually still wants to see Collapsible be lowered off. But instead, the boat actually floated off because finally the water itself enveloped the bridge. Charles Lightoller was actually pinned to a metal grate to a ventilator basically up here, and it looked like that he was going to be gone. He was going to be a goner. But unexpectedly, an unexpected explosion, preferably down in the boiler room, actually shot hot air back him up into the surface near Collapsible B.
And then the unimaginable happened. The shroud cables for Titanic's first funnel collapsed and fell to starboard. This generated a massive wave that pushed Collapsibles A and B away from the ship. Charles Lightoller was missed by inches from the collapsing funnel. Anyone caught around the impact zone were immediately killed, and anyone unfortunate to get caught into the vortex of where the first funnel stood would get pulled down with the ship. Now at this point, that any new openings generated by the breaking of the windows, the cowl vents, or the collapsing funnels is enough for water to flow into.
Now the reason that these funnels actually did collapse was that these funnels are actually made from a thin metal. And once the pressure is too great in the base area of the funnel, once it's submerged, the inwards is actually crushed, causing the funnel to collapse.
Seconds after the first funnel fell, the crowning jewel of the Titanic, the Grand Staircase, imploded, releasing tons and tons of seawater. The suction pulled in Colonel Archibald Gracely, who held onto a railing, and the second funnel too collapsed. As the top exploded in a shower of sparks and fire, as described by Jack Thayer, who jumped into the water after Milton Long did. Unfortunately, his friend would never be seen again. As the unsupported stern rose higher, it reached the maximum height of 23 to 24 degrees, then something happened. Decking started to break apart, and loud bangs and explosions were heard. And finally, Titanic's structure failed catastrophically, breaking the liner into two massive pieces. Additionally, the tower where Funnel 3 stood also collapsed, and another tower aft of the first tower broke off. The dead weight of the bow hung onto the stern for a bit, allowing the stern to quickly take on water.
So this part is actually going to be a condensed version from a historic travels video that was actually mentioned. When basically water goes inside the hull of the ship, it actually doesn't get heavier, but it actually does lose buoyancy. So it actually does depend on what kind of damage that was actually inflicted. Since the Titanic itself did actually lost 6 of the 16 watertight compartments, the water actually pushes the bow further and further down, and the final plunge actually rapidly accelerated. And shockingly, a piece of testimony actually did came from one survivor that was actually around in this area before the breakup, and it's by the name of Charles Yalkin, as he was actually in the A-deck pantry prior to the ship's breakup, grabbing a drink of water, and then he actually heard what he reported was steel beams snapping and a great rush of the crowd moving aft. Fortunately, he got out of the pantry as the pantry room was destroyed. So what he basically heard was the iron parting, and that's basically his words. So the center of the gravity is actually not necessarily in the center itself, but it's actually in the heaviest areas, which is the engine room. Basically, these big 3-story engines, 900-ton reciprocating engines, and with the stern rising, it basically put a strain and a bend force around the midsection, and the hull couldn't take it anymore, and Titanic's structure catastrophically failed, thus tearing the ship into 2 massive pieces and also into 3 and 4 pieces, as 2 more boathouses actually broke off from the ship as well.
The weight of the bow drags the stern up to a near 90-degree angle, and the 4th funnel will collapse as the stern began its descent. The bow finally detaches from the ship and begins its descent to the bottom, 2.5 miles down to the ocean floor, to which says she will never see the light of day ever again. As the stern stayed nearly vertical for a few minutes, the stern finally floods and goes under. A series of air pockets bursting through different areas such as the cargo hatches allowed water to have a new way into the stern of the ship, to which the stern is in a bad state of condition given the conditions the stern went through as it wasn't flooding properly. And then finally at 2:20 a.m. on April 15, 1912, the Titanic disappears into the North Atlantic Ocean, stranding 1,500 passengers to die. As taken from the Titanic book On a Sea of Glass, the water is 28 degrees Fahrenheit, as a normal person has a 10-minute survival time in the water before suffering cardiac arrest. Charles Lightoller said it felt like 1,000 knives stabbing him all at once. Contact with the cold water has an effect on mental health and struggle to survive on finding out what to do in the water. The biggest danger in the water is hypothermia.
Hypothermia is the body response when the body core temperature drops below 95 degrees Fahrenheit. The body actually redirects blood to vital organs such as the heart, lungs, and the brain. So imagine swimming around and you lose feeling in your arms and legs, and after a certain point, you'll end up drowning in the cold. Now keep in mind though, this is actually a moonless night, so everyone in the water are actually swimming around, struggling for life in the darkness. The rest of the lifeboats actually had to listen to the screams and cries from the passengers. So basically, this is their hell for them. So half an hour after the Titanic sank, screams began to die down as passengers slowly succumbed to the cold.
At 3 a.m., Fifth Officer Harold Lowe organized a search party to organize a rescue operation to pick up anyone that could possibly be alive in the water. Unfortunately, he waited for too long as most of the survivors died as possible. Now, keep this in mind, though. Titanic sank at 2:20 a.m., and Lowe is in Lifeboat 14, and one more, Lifeboat number 4, went back to the wreck site to find anyone else that could possibly be alive. But unfortunately, they were met with a sea of bodies.
Is there anyone alive out there?
Now, the problem to finding survivors is that it's pure darkness. So the crew would have to go off by sound just to find anyone. So this will actually be evident when Harold Lowe actually rescued a passenger by the name of Fang Lang, who was a third-class Chinese passenger, and he was one of the luckiest passengers to ever survive the Titanic disaster. He was actually able to balance himself, keeping his own core body out of the water. But you have to remember, his hands and legs were actually frozen as well. But the biggest importance was basically keep your core body out of the water. Lowe actually looked for any more survivors. Basically, there were 3 more that were actually rescued, but one of them died, unfortunately, and it would be hours until rescue come for them.
The Carpathia arrived at the original distress coordinates, but couldn't find the Titanic anywhere. The crew on board noticed a green light off the port bow of the ship and immediately raced there. The green light could possibly be either the starboard bridge wing, which is your navigation or your running light, to the Titanic, as they possibly think the ship is disabled and is still afloat. But as they got closer, it turns out that green light that they saw was a flare from Joseph Boxhall in Lifeboat number 2. Boxhall lit these green flares up to gather all the lifeboats all together. With these flares being constantly lighting up, it brought the Carpathia to the Titanic survivors. The Carpathia started firing flares to let Titanic passengers know that help has finally arrived for them.